Evening. What's going on tonight? What are you doing near this car?
Getting coffee. Took a minute in the lot. What's the reason for the contact?
I need to see your driver's license.
State the legal basis.
Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Who are you meeting?
I'm not answering extra questions without a reason.
You're being evasive. Turn
My
around.
hands are visible. You have my ID. Say the reason.
What happened when a patrol officer decided a black internal affairs chief looked suspicious for sitting in his own car with a coffee and kept escalating even after learning who he was? It didn't end with an awkward apology. Where are you watching from? Drop your state or country in the comments. And if you like stories where somebody tries a power move and the footage forces consequences, hit like and subscribe. You'll want the next part because this officer didn't just overstep, he documented it. Now, rewind. Briar Ridge PD had been trying to look clean lately. New statements, new training memos, supervisors reminding everybody about professionalism. The public heard it and rolled their eyes. Inside the department, some officers treated it like noise. Internal Affairs didn't treat it like noise. Deputy Chief Malcolm Brooks ran IA, black man, mid-40s, not flashy, not a speech guy. He was a paperwork and proof guy. The kind of supervisor who didn't need to yell because he could pull the footage and line it up with the policy. That evening, Brooks wasn't running an operation. No sting, no secret meeting. He was off duty in the practical way high-ranking cops are off duty, meaning his phone still buzzed and his mind didn't fully shut off. He grabbed a coffee and parked in a gas station lot for a few minutes, sitting, checking messages, decompressing. Officer Nolan Kincaid saw the car and decided it didn't belong. Kincaid had a reputation on patrol, loud confidence, quick to treat questions like disrespect, the type who believed control came from pressure. He also had a history of complaints that never landed hard enough to stick, the kind of paper trail that always had "not sustained" stamped on it somewhere. That's why this night mattered. Not because it was dramatic, because it was normal. And normal is where people show who they are. Kincaid pulled in behind Brooks's sedan and hit him with the spotlight. He didn't start with a simple greeting. He started with authority, ID request. What are you doing here? Why are you sitting here? The vibe wasn't curiosity, it was accusation. Brooks didn't match energy. He didn't try to big rank him yet. He gave ID. He kept his hands where they could be seen. He asked a basic question back. What was the reason for the contact? Kincaid didn't answer cleanly. He circled around it. He implied the car looked suspicious. He implied Brooks was being difficult for even asking. Brooks noticed Kincaid's stance. Kincaid kept angling his body, like he wanted the Bodycam audio to be messy, like he wanted the record to be unclear. Brooks made it clear without drama that the interaction was being recorded beyond just the Bodycam, dash cam, lot cameras, everything. That should have cooled Kincaid down. A smart officer hears multiple cameras and stays professional. Kincaid doubled down. And that's the point where Brooks finally did identify himself properly. Name, badge, title, still calm, still controlled. Kincaid processed it. You could feel it in the pause. Then he did something that told you everything you needed to know. He didn't reset. He didn't apologize. He didn't step back. He got more aggressive. That little pause after Kincaid read the ID, it didn't soften him. It hardened him. He looked at Malcolm Brooks like Brooks had personally insulted him by existing in that seat. Then he started talking the way some cops talk when they think they've been challenged. Not about the parking lot, not about safety, about control. Kincaid told Brooks the stop wasn't over. He told him to step out of the vehicle. He framed it like Brooks was delaying on purpose, like asking for a reason was arguing. Brooks kept it tight, hands visible, calm tone. He repeated the same point. He'd comply with lawful orders, and he wanted the legal basis stated clearly. Simple, professional. The kind of answer that gives an officer a clean exit if the officer wants one. Kincaid didn't take the exit. He shifted into contempt. He started taking shots at internal affairs as a concept. He painted IA as people who sit behind desks and ruin careers. He made it personal by making it about Brooks's position, like Brooks didn't earn it, like it was a gimmick. And then he did the thing officers do when they want to manufacture justification. He started fishing. He said he needed to check the car. He implied he had reasons. He leaned in toward the window like he was sniffing for something that wasn't there. He asked questions that weren't connected to anything: where Brooks was coming from, where he was going, why he was parked, who he was meeting, why he was in this part of the city. He wasn't investigating a violation. He was looking for a hook. Brooks didn't get dragged into the trap. He didn't answer extra. He didn't volunteer a story Kincaid could twist. He stayed focused on process. He asked if he was being detained or free to go. He asked for the specific violation. He reminded Kincaid again that the interaction was being recorded by more than one camera. That reminder hit Kincaid the wrong way. You could almost feel it. Kincaid stepped a half pace back, then repositioned so his body blocked the cleanest angle of his own camera. He also raised his voice, not to communicate, but to dominate. He wanted it loud. He wanted it messy. He wanted the record to sound like compliance problem instead of officer problem. Brooks stayed even. Then Kincaid made the next move in the chess game. He tried to turn Brooks into a suspect with labels. He described Brooks as non-compliant. He described him as evasive. He described him as hostile without Brooks being hostile at all. That kind of language matters because it's the foundation officers use later to justify everything else. Brooks didn't argue the labels. He challenged the facts underneath them. He asked Kincaid to repeat on camera what order he was giving and what law it was tied to. He asked if a supervisor was being called. He kept giving Kincaid the same off-ramp: say the reason, do this correctly, end it. Kincaid didn't want to correct. He wanted submission. So he escalated again. He threatened removal from the car. He hinted at cuffs. He used that tone that says, I can do whatever I want, and you can't stop it. Brooks didn't flinch. He didn't dare him either. He just made it clear he wasn't consenting to any search, and that if Kincaid believed he had legal cause, he needed to articulate it and be ready to explain it to command staff. Brooks wasn't flexing. He was forecasting. That's when Kincaid's taunts got uglier. He didn't use slurs. He didn't need to. He went for that coded disrespect some people use when they want to put a black man in his place without saying it outright. He implied Brooks was only in that position because the city wanted a certain image. He implied Brooks didn't understand real policing. He implied oversight was the enemy, and Brooks was the face of it. And here's what's crazy. Kincaid said all of this after he knew exactly who Malcolm Brooks was. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. Brooks gave him one more clean warning. Not a threat, a boundary. He told him the conduct was crossing into retaliation and harassment. He told him the record would reflect it. He told him to call a supervisor to the scene. Kincaid answered by going to the radio. He called for backup, and he painted Brooks as the problem. He didn't say, I've got the IA chief here, and I need a supervisor for transparency. He said the kind of thing that makes the responding units show up keyed up. He described a suspicious vehicle. He described a driver refusing commands. He framed it like officer safety was at risk. All while Brooks sat there, still, hands visible, coffee untouched, acting like a professional adult. Kincaid wanted the next officers to arrive already leaning his way. That's how these things get dangerous without anyone throwing a punch. Narrative first, reality second. Brooks didn't panic. He did something subtle instead. He positioned his phone so it would catch audio clearly, not to go viral. To preserve a clean record in case someone tried to summarize the stop later. Now Kincaid had a problem. He couldn't intimidate Brooks into silence. He couldn't bluff Brooks into consent. And he couldn't pretend cameras weren't watching. So he made it personal again. He leaned closer to the window and pushed the same demand out of the vehicle, like volume could substitute for legality. Headlights appeared at the edge of the lot a moment later. Another unit coming in hot. Kincaid straightened up like he was about to perform. Brooks stayed calm because he already knew the truth. Once other officers arrived, Kincaid wouldn't just be dealing with a driver. He'd be dealing with witnesses. The second unit hit the lot with urgency. Tires slowed hard, doors opened fast. Kincaid turned into it like he'd been waiting for an audience. He started talking before anyone even got close enough to see Malcolm Brooks's face clearly, and he fed his version first. Drivers being difficult. Drivers refusing orders. Drivers making it unsafe. That's how these things go when someone's trying to control the record. Build the story early. Let everyone else inherit it. Sergeant Mateo Alvarez stepped out and did one quick scan. Cruiser placement, body language, hands, distance. Then his eyes landed on the driver. He recognized Brooks immediately. Alvarez didn't show panic, but his face tightened. He knew what this was, not a normal stop, not a misunderstanding, a career event. Officer Tessa Reed, the rookie, hovered behind Alvarez and followed his gaze. She recognized Brooks from department briefings and staff emails. Her posture changed on the spot, like her brain was trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she'd been taught. Kincaid kept going anyway. He didn't reset his tone, he didn't back off. He acted like the badge on his chest gave him permission to ignore rank, process, and basic sense. He told Alvarez, loud, that Brooks was refusing to exit the vehicle and that he needed compliance. Alvarez didn't mirror the energy. He did the supervisor thing. He asked for the reason for the stop and the justification for the escalation. Clean questions, the kind that forces an officer to either articulate facts or admit he's running on ego. Kincaid didn't have facts. He had attitude. He tried to turn it into a department culture argument. He started complaining about oversight, about how IA always second-guessed patrol, about how certain people in leadership didn't respect street cops. He said it like it excused what he was doing in that moment. That was the slip. Because once he admitted his real focus wasn't the parking lot, it wasn't suspicious behavior, it wasn't safety, it was resentment toward internal affairs. The stop stopped being a stop. It became retaliation on camera. Brooks didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look impressed. He stayed steady and did something most people don't do under pressure. He kept it procedural. He told Alvarez he wanted the stop documented exactly as it was happening, with no side explanations and no private, let me tell you what really happened huddles. He also made it clear he wasn't consenting to any search, and that Kincaid still hadn't stated a lawful reason for the orders he'd been giving. Reed looked between them like she was watching a rulebook get tested in real time. Kincaid didn't like Brooks directing anything. You could see it hit his pride. He tried to reclaim control by stepping closer to the driver's window again. Alvarez cut that off. He ordered Kincaid to step back and give space. Not a suggestion. A supervisor order. Alvarez's voice came out controlled, but firm enough that Reed straightened up immediately. Kincaid hesitated. Kincaid? That tiny hesitation mattered too. It showed he was deciding whether to obey. He obeyed, but he made sure everyone saw his irritation. He kept talking, still trying to label Brooks as difficult, still trying to preserve his story. He wanted Alvarez to buy it. He wanted Reed to absorb it. He wanted the department's default loyalty to carry him over the gap, where his justification should have been. Alvarez didn't buy it. He asked again for the specific reason for the contact. Specific. Not vibes, not looked suspicious. A real reason. Kincaid tried to dodge again, and it landed flat, because now there were 3 cameras minimum on the scene. His own body cam, his dash cam, the store's lot cameras. Maybe Brooks' phone too. Alvarez knew that. Brooks knew that. Kincaid knew it most of all. Brooks finally gave Alvarez the key detail he'd been holding back. He identified himself clearly as the internal affairs chief and said he'd been sitting there drinking coffee, doing nothing illegal, when Kincaid decided to turn it into a confrontation. Alvarez took one more look at Kincaid. The look supervisors give when they realize they're going to be writing a lot of paperwork for someone who didn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. Then Alvarez made the call that changed the whole tone. He requested a command lieutenant to respond. Immediate. On scene. No delay. He also told Reed to stay present and observe. No wandering off, no go handle traffic. He wanted witnesses locked in. Kincaid tried one last angle. He acted like oversight was interfering with policing, like the department was handcuffing him, like he was the victim of leadership. Brooks didn't argue the speech. He didn't need to. He ended the confrontation the way an IA chief ends things, when someone's digging their own hole. He told Kincaid, calm and clear, that accountability wasn't a personal attack and it wasn't optional. It came with the job. And the record was going to reflect everything Kincaid had chosen to do after learning exactly who he was talking to. Kincaid went quiet for the first time. Not because he suddenly understood professionalism, because he finally understood consequences. The command lieutenant arrived and didn't waste time. He separated people. He asked for the reason for contact. He got the same vague answer Kincaid had been dodging with all night. Then the lieutenant did the one thing that tells you a supervisor knows a disaster when he sees one. He ended it. He told Brooks he was free to go. He told Alvarez to stay put and start the documentation. He told Kincaid to stop talking and keep his camera on. Kincaid tried to squeeze in a last narrative push on the spot. He wanted the lieutenant to validate him. He wanted someone higher up to say he did the right thing. That didn't happen. The lieutenant sent Kincaid back to the station, not to keep working, but to wait. That difference matters. Cops know it. Kincaid knew it too. Brooks left the lot like any other driver would. No victory lap, no speech, no theatrics. The coffee sat untouched the whole time. The point wasn't the coffee anyway. The point was the officer who chose to turn a normal moment into a power game. And now the cameras had a full record of every choice he made. Back at headquarters, the process started fast, the way it only starts fast when leadership knows the evidence is bad. Brooks didn't run the investigation himself. That's what people assume IA chiefs do. In reality, good departments avoid conflicts like that. Brooks triggered the process and stepped back from the lead role. He routed it to professional standards with oversight from command staff, clean chain, clean paperwork, no excuses later. First move, preservation. They locked the body cam footage before anyone could misplace it. Same for dash cam. Same for radio traffic, CAD notes, dispatch audio, the timestamps, the call history. They pulled the gas station surveillance too, because Kincaid's whole stop leaned on the idea that he had reason to treat Brooks like a problem. Lot footage doesn't care about vibes. It shows what happened. Second move, duty status. By the next shift, Kincaid sat on administrative leave. He still got pay at first. That's how it works in most places. Leave doesn't mean innocence. It means the department needed him off the street while they reviewed a stop that already looked like misconduct on its face. Third move, statements. Alvarez wrote his report the same night. He didn't dress it up. He described what he saw, what he heard, and how Kincaid behaved after learning who Brooks was. Reed wrote hers too. That rookie report mattered more than people think. Rookies don't have old loyalties yet. They describe what happened the way training taught them. Straight, unpolished, hard to spin. Kincaid's report hit the system later and read like a script. Lots of labels, few facts. A lot of uncooperative without clean articulation of why the contact escalated in the first place. Then the interviews came. Kincaid showed up with a union rep because of course he did. He leaned into the classic defenses. He framed it as officer safety. He framed Brooks as argumentative. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding. That strategy works when the record has gaps. This record didn't. The footage showed Brooks staying calm, hands visible, minimal movement, clear questions, no threats, no sudden moves, no behavior that justified the tone Kincaid used. The footage also showed Kincaid switching gears the moment he recognized the name. That was the part that killed him. Not because he made a bad call at first, because He doubled down after he knew. That's not confusion, that's intent. Professional standards pulled Kincaid's history next, not to punish him for old stuff, to test pattern. They looked at his past stops flagged as uncooperative subject. They compared those labels to video. They looked for the same pressure tactics, same narrative building, same habit of escalating, then writing like the driver forced his hand. They found enough to make leadership nervous. Not nervous about Kincaid, nervous about what it said the department had tolerated. Inside the building, the mood split fast. Some officers were furious at Kincaid for embarrassing them, not because they loved internal affairs, because he dragged the whole department into a mess that didn't need to exist. He made everyone look like they couldn't control their own people. Others got quiet. They'd seen Kincaid push people around before. They'd heard the way he talked when he thought nobody important was listening. This time, somebody important was listening. With cameras. The rookies watched it like a lesson they didn't ask for. Reed especially. She saw how fast an officer could turn authority into bullying and still believe he was the victim. That sticks with you. Then it hit outside the building. The footage didn't stay internal. It never does anymore. A public records request came in. Local media caught wind of it. The city reviewed what could be released. They released enough. People saw the escalation, not as an isolated clip, but as a timeline. Start to finish. The officer's posture. The radio call. The way he tried to set the story before backup arrived. The way he kept pushing after he learned the man in the driver's seat ran internal affairs. And the public reaction wasn't confusion. It was recognition. A lot of people said the same thing in different words. If he acted like that toward the IA chief, imagine how he acted toward regular civilians who didn't know policy and didn't have rank. That's what damaged trust. Not the traffic stop, the mindset behind it. The department had to respond with something stronger than a memo. So they moved the case to a disciplinary board review with command staff and city HR present. They also looped in the city attorney because Kincaid's behavior raised legal risk, retaliation, abuse of authority, false statements, the kind of stuff that turns into lawsuits and settlements fast. Kincaid still tried to fight it. He filed a complaint against Brooks. He claimed Brooks provoked him. He framed it as leadership harassment. He wanted counterpressure. He wanted the process to slow down. It didn't slow down. The evidence ran too clean. The final findings hit in plain language. They substantiated harassment and unprofessional conduct. They substantiated insubordination because he ignored clear supervisory direction and kept escalating. They substantiated misuse of authority because the stop had no solid legal foundation once you stripped away the labels. They nailed him on report credibility too because his written narrative didn't match the video record. That's where departments usually stop. Suspension, demotion, quiet transfer. This time they didn't. They terminated him. He walked out without his badge. No second chance. No resignation in good standing. The department also forwarded the case to the state certification board. That step matters. It's what blocks the usual move where a fired cop just hops to the next town and gets rehired. Kincaid didn't just lose his job. He lost his path. After that, Briar Ridge had to do something internal that actually changed behavior, not just optics. They wrote new policy language targeting retaliatory contacts. They tightened rules around suspicious vehicle encounters, requiring clear articulation tied to observable facts. They added supervisor response requirements when a stop involved department personnel or when an officer claimed uncooperative without a clear lawful basis. They expanded Bodycam audits, so complaint categories triggered automatic review, not random spot checks. They also did something quietly powerful. They trained supervisors to step in early, the way Alvarez did, and they backed them up for it. No punishing a sergeant for correcting a problem officer. No leaving supervisors hanging while the union screams. Brooks kept doing his job. People expected him to gloat. He didn't. He treated it like any other case. Facts, record, outcome. That pissed off the thin blue ego crowd more than any speech would have. Because calm accountability is hard to argue with. And Reed, she went back to patrol with a different kind of confidence. Not the loud kind. The kind that comes from seeing the system work when it chooses to. Here's the lesson, and you've probably already got it. Power doesn't expose itself when everything's easy. It exposes itself when someone hears no and decides to punish the person who said it. Kincaid tried to punish a man for asking for lawful reasons. He kept going after he knew that man ran internal affairs. Cameras didn't create the misconduct. They just removed the escape hatch. Now I'm curious. What would you have done if you were Alvarez walking into that lot? Would you have checked your officer right there? Or would you have tried to smooth it over and handle it later? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more true-to-life stories, where accountability actually lands and the footage forces consequences like the video, share it with somebody who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
All right, gentlemen, what's going on? I need to see your IDs.
What's the call for?
We got a call about two guys hanging around out here. That's why I'm talking to you.
Okay. What is suspicious about just standing in the parking lot?
Stop with the legal talk. Do you have ID or not?
Yes, but there's no legal reason I'm providing it.
What happens when two undercover detectives stage in a shopping plaza parking lot for an active operation and uniformed patrol shows up, demanding IDs like they've caught suspects in the act? The answer isn't what most people think. Because the cameras didn't just capture a tense stop. They captured officers trying to build a detention out of nothing. And they did it in public. Quick check-in. Where are you watching from today? Country, state, whatever. Drop it in the comments. And if you watch stories where power gets challenged with facts, hit like and subscribe because this one shows how fast a simple call turns into real damage. Now rewind. It was mid-morning at a busy shopping plaza. Not rush hour, not dead either. People drifted in and out, coffee cups, grocery bags, a delivery truck backing up and beeping like it owned the place. And in the middle of that normal noise, two undercover detectives used the parking lot as a staging point. Jordan Price and Cameron Reed weren't shopping. They weren't loitering for fun. They were working. They stayed on foot, not sitting in a car, because the sightlines mattered. Entrances mattered. Timing mattered. They needed angles. They needed to watch who came out of which doorway and how long someone lingered before moving. Their team had a synchronized approach plan, not sloppy, not rushed, tight. But to anyone who didn't know what they were doing, it looked like two men staying in the same area longer than most shoppers would, and that's all it took. A plaza employee noticed them and decided it felt wrong. Not illegal, not threatening, just wrong. The employee didn't walk over and ask if they needed help, didn't check if they worked there, didn't get a manager, just called police with a vague report that two men had been hanging around the lot too long. That kind of call shouldn't be a big deal, not by itself. It's a check-in call at most. But Officer Dylan Mercer didn't treat it that way. He arrived like he expected a crime in progress. He brought his partner, Officer Paige Nolan, and both of them moved with that stiff posture cops get when they've already decided what they're looking at. They locked eyes on Jordan and Cameron fast. No greeting, no calm questions, no basic explanation. They went straight to control. Mercer demanded identification right away and acted like refusal meant guilt. Nolan backed him up and held position like they were containing a threat. Jordan and Cameron didn't get loud. They didn't get disrespectful. They stayed calm and did what trained people do when the situation starts sliding into nonsense. They asked for specifics. They asked what crime the officers believed had happened. They asked what facts created suspicion. They asked the one question that forces clarity. Were they detained or free to go? Mercer didn't answer cleanly. He just kept pushing the ID demand and tightening the situation. Nolan followed his lead, repeating the same command, same tone, same pressure. And right there, you could see the whole problem. A vague call comes in. No allegation of theft, no weapon. No trespass notice. No threats. No report of an assault. Nothing. Just a feeling that two men stayed too long. That's not a lawful detention by itself. That's not reasonable suspicion. That's not even close. But Mercer acted like it was enough. He kept them in the open, in the middle of the lot, not off to the side, not a quick conversation. He held the line and made it a scene. Minutes started stacking up, and every minute mattered. Jordan and Cameron's operation depended on the plaza staying boring. The target needed to keep thinking everything was normal. No uniforms, no flashing lights, no cluster of people watching, no tension in the air. But now the environment changed. Shoppers noticed two officers posted up on two men. People slowed down, heads turned. Phones came out. That's how it always goes. Someone sees the posture, the stance, the tone, and they know it's not just a friendly chat. So they film. Not because they're activists, because they don't trust what happens when nobody records it. Jordan and Cameron stayed controlled anyway. They didn't try to walk off and create an excuse for escalation. They didn't argue in circles. They kept pressing the same clean questions over and over because those questions expose whether the stop has any real foundation. Mercer still refused to give a clear legal reason. He kept treating the demand for ID like it was the reason. And that's backwards. A demand isn't justification. A badge isn't a blank check. Cameron scanned the plaza the way he couldn't help doing. He tracked entrances with his eyes. He watched movement patterns. He could feel the operation slipping. Jordan stayed focused on the officers. He watched Mercer's face every time he asked for the facts. He watched Nolan mirror Mercer's posture like she was afraid to break rank, even if the stop didn't make sense. And the pressure tactics kept coming. Mercer used the voice cops use when they want compliance without explanation. Nolan reinforced it. They tried to box Jordan and Cameron into a choice. Comply now, or get treated like criminals. But Jordan and Cameron didn't give them the reaction they wanted. No sudden movements, no insults, no ego battle. Just calm. Just questions. Just boundaries. And that made Mercer worse. Because some officers hate one thing more than refusal. They hate calm refusal. That's when bystanders got closer, not too close. Close enough to capture audio. Close enough to catch the body language. Close enough that Mercer couldn't pretend this was private. Across the lot, the actual target's pattern shifted. Nothing dramatic, just enough. A pause, a glance, a change in route. Small changes, big meaning. Jordan's team wasn't ready yet. The timing broke, the window narrowed, and Mercer still couldn't say what law had been violated. He kept holding them anyway. By then, this wasn't just an annoying stop. It was interference. It was a public detention built on a vague call and a power trip, happening in the exact place Jordan and Cameron needed to stay invisible. Mercer kept the stop going even after it was obvious Jordan and Cameron weren't doing anything criminal. He still demanded identification and still wouldn't give a clear reason for holding them. Nolan stayed with him and backed every step, like she didn't want to be the one who questioned it. The longer it dragged, the more visible it got. People started filming because it looked like a detention, not a quick check. One of the clearest angles came from a man named Marcus, who sat in a wheelchair near the coffee spot. He didn't crowd anybody. He just held his phone steady and recorded the whole thing from a safe distance, including Mercer's tone and the way the officers kept Jordan and Cameron in place without explaining the legal basis. That's what killed the operation. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the disruption. Uniforms in the open, voices raised, bystanders stopping to watch. The target noticed the shift in the parking lot and adjusted. Nothing dramatic, no running. Just a change in movement that told Jordan and Cameron the window was closing. Cameron tried to keep eyes on the entrances without looking obvious. Jordan stayed focused on the officers because Mercer kept pressing like he wanted a reaction he could use. Jordan and Cameron didn't give him one. They stayed controlled and kept asking the same practical questions. What specific facts led to this? What crime was suspected? And whether they were being detained or free to leave? Mercer avoided answering straight. He treated the ID demand like it was the reason, not the result. Then Eric Dalton arrived. Dalton was plainclothes, but he carried himself like supervision. He didn't come in smiling, he didn't chat. He went straight to Mercer and made him explain out loud why he was detaining two men over a vague call from a plaza employee. Mercer tried to justify it with general language about suspicious behavior and safety. Dalton didn't accept that. He pushed for actual observations that matched a lawful standard. What did they do? What did they touch? Who did they approach? What threat did anyone report? What crime did Mercer think was happening? Mercer couldn't answer with anything solid. And when Dalton forced him to stop circling, Mercer finally said the quiet part in a way the cameras could catch. The main issue was that Jordan and Cameron had been in the lot for too long. That was the turning point. Because once that became the stated basis, the detention fell apart. Staying in a parking lot isn't a crime. Standing around longer than a shopper isn't a crime. And without specific facts tied to an actual offense, the stop had no legs. Dalton made Mercer end it immediately. Nolan backed off once Dalton stepped in. Mercer's posture changed fast because now he had oversight standing right there and multiple cameras pointed at him. Jordan didn't gloat. He didn't argue for the sake of it. He said one clean thing that landed because it was true. Next time, bring facts, not a feeling. But the mission still didn't recover. By the time Jordan and Cameron got clear, the target had already changed course and disappeared into the flow of the plaza. Their team couldn't complete the approach because the environment was blown. The opportunity closed while Mercer was busy trying to turn a vague call into a detention. And that's what made this bigger than a bad stop. Plaza security cameras had the wide view. Bodycams had the officer perspective. Marcus's video had the clearest outside angle of the detention and the pressure. 3 sources, same story. Officers held 2 calm men, demanded ID repeatedly, and couldn't articulate a real legal basis until supervision arrived. That footage didn't just look bad. It created a record that people couldn't ignore. Jordan and Cameron didn't get to reset the mission after the detention ended. That chance didn't exist. The target had already changed behavior, blended into the normal plaza flow, and disappeared before the team could finish the approach. Jordan's unit ran the post checks anyway. They checked exits, they checked cameras their team had access to. They checked timing against radio logs. The results stayed the same. The operation got blown because a vague call turned into a public detention with no real legal basis. That alone would have been bad. But it didn't stay inside the department. The footage made sure of that. Within days, the recordings started circulating. Not just one clip, multiple angles. The plaza's security view showed how long Mercer and Nolan held Jordan and Cameron in place. The Bodycam audio captured the repeated ID demands and the way Mercer dodged the basic question of what specific crime he suspected. Marcus's wheelchair angle showed the public impact. Officers pressing 2 calm men while shoppers watched. And once video like that exists, people start asking the questions that matter. Who called this in, and what did they actually report? Why did the officers treat it like a crime in progress with no described crime? Why didn't they clearly state whether it was a voluntary contact or detention? Why did it take a plainclothes supervisor showing up for anyone to start talking about actual legal standards? Internal leadership couldn't brush it off as just a misunderstanding. The mission was real. The interference was real. And the record was too clean. Then it escalated again for a separate reason. The operation had federal coordination connected to it. That detail didn't hit the public right away, but it hit the right desks fast. Once the stop got flagged as interference with federal work, the review stopped being optional. Investigators requested everything. Plaza security footage, full body cam files, dispatch audio, CAD notes, unit arrival times, supervisor communications, any prior calls from that Plaza employee, any pattern of similar lingering stops by Mercer and Nolan. They didn't just look at the moment, they looked at behavior. And Mercer's problem was simple. He couldn't articulate reasonable suspicion beyond. They were there too long. That sounded weak on the street, and it sounded worse on paper. Nolan didn't escape it either. She reinforced the detention. She didn't correct it. She didn't step in to narrow it. She stayed aligned with Mercer's decisions, and the cameras caught that too. The department tried to contain it at first. Standard move, quiet review, quiet meetings, quiet statements. That didn't work. Because the case wasn't just about optics. It was about unlawful detention and mistreatment under color of authority, plus operational interference. The facts didn't support the officers. The evidence didn't leave room for creative storytelling. The city suspended both officers while the investigation ran. Mercer tried to defend the stop as proactive policing. Nolan tried to frame it as following procedure. Investigators kept dragging it back to the same question. What specific facts justified detaining two men who were not committing any reported crime? They never produced a clean answer. And once that happened, the next steps were predictable. Mercer lost his job. Nolan lost hers too. The department couldn't keep them after the footage and the findings, not without admitting that this was normal practice. They didn't want to admit that. Jordan and Cameron didn't treat the firings like a victory. They treated them like a consequence. They still had to explain to their own chain of command why the mission failed. They still had to document how the stop disrupted timing and changed the environment. They still had to sit in meetings where people pretended it was all unfortunate instead of avoidable. Then came the lawsuit, not a small one. The city faced real exposure because the detention happened in public, lacked articulable reasonable suspicion, and got backed up by multiple recordings. The claim didn't hinge on one person's memory. It hinged on video and audio. The city didn't want a trial with those clips playing on a screen for a week. So it ended in a $5 million outcome, tied to the unlawful detention and mistreatment, plus the damage caused by the interference. The payout hit budgets. It hit reputations. It forced the city to choose between denial and reform. They chose reform, but only after it cost them. Policy changes rolled out after that. Dispatch updated how they handled vague, suspicious person calls. Officers now had to document specific observed behavior before turning a contact into a detention. Supervisors got clearer authority and responsibility to end weak stops early, not after they'd already created a mess. Bodycam review rules tightened. Training got mandatory with real scenarios focused on reasonable suspicion, detention limits, and how to separate discomfort from criminal indicators. And the plaza itself changed too. Management adjusted how employees reported concerns. They emphasized descriptions and actual behaviors, not general fear. The employee who made the original call didn't control what happened after, but that call started the chain, and the plaza learned what vague reporting can trigger when officers show up ready to dominate instead of assess. Months later, the lot looked like it always did: cars, coffee, people walking with bags. But the department didn't look the same. Jordan and Cameron went back to work because that's what they did. They kept doing operations, they kept planning staging points, they kept watching the same kinds of entrances. But they also carried that lesson with them. It only takes one patrol decision, one ego moment, one weak call handled badly to burn months of work and put everyone at risk. And for anyone watching this, here's the point. When officers can't explain why they're detaining someone, that's not a small issue. That's the whole issue. The Constitution isn't based on vibes. It's based on facts. If an officer can't state the facts, they don't get to take your freedom just to check. Now tell me this. If you were standing there, filming like Marcus did, What would you focus on to make sure the truth couldn't get twisted later? And if you've ever been stopped on a vague excuse, did the officer actually explain the reason, or did they just repeat commands until you gave up? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who thinks it's no big deal to hold people for nothing. And subscribe if you want more real, grounded stories where accountability actually shows up.
Receipt. You need to show me your receipt before you leave.
No, I paid. I'm leaving.
You're not walking out without showing it.
What's going on there?
Refusing a receipt check isn't theft. Check your register.
Just show the receipt and we're done.
I'm not required to.
What happened when a black FBI agent tried to leave an electronics store like any other customer, and a loss prevention worker decided a receipt check was something he could enforce with his body? The outcome surprised people for one reason. The cameras didn't just capture a messy misunderstanding. They captured choices that crossed legal lines. Quick question before the story rolls back. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you care about accountability, evidence, and people standing firm without getting reckless, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. This started at Apex Digital inside Pinecrest Commons in Tampa on a normal shopping day with normal foot traffic. Julian Cross came in for high-end electronics. He wasn't acting secretive. He wasn't rushing. He bought what he came for, paid at the register, and walked toward the exit holding a shopping bag like everyone else. At the doorway, Derek Harlan from Loss Prevention stepped into Julian's path and turned the exit into a checkpoint. He made it clear he wanted the receipt, and he framed it like Julian had to comply. Julian didn't argue in circles. He didn't perform for the crowd. He calmly refused and tried to continue out, the same way customers do when they don't want a receipt check. That's when Derek made the first move that mattered. He physically blocked the exit. Not by standing nearby, not by asking again. He positioned himself to stop Julian from leaving. The dynamic changed right there, from a store employee making a request to a store employee attempting to control someone's movement. Julian didn't swing, shove, or threaten. He tried to walk around Derek instead of through him. He stayed controlled, like someone who understood that the moment you get emotional, the story gets rewritten around you. Derek escalated anyway. Instead of doing the simple step that solves most of these situations, verifying the purchase, he went straight to calling police. And when he called, he didn't frame it as a receipt dispute or a customer refusing a voluntary check. He framed it like theft. That single decision shaped everything that happened next. Now the store entrance had bystanders slowing down. Some people kept walking, but enough stopped to pay attention because the situation looked wrong. A few said they had seen Julian pay. More than one person pulled out a phone and started recording because the body blocking at the exit didn't look like store policy. It looked like a detention. Derek held his position. Julian held his ground. The argument didn't turn into shouting. It turned into a standoff where one side acted like refusal itself was suspicious, and the other side acted like rights didn't disappear just because someone wore a loss prevention badge. Minutes later, a patrol unit arrived. The young officer, Evan Rourke, stepped in and immediately treated the refusal as the main problem, not the lack of verified facts. He focused on forcing compliance first, as if getting Julian to submit would retroactively justify the stop. Julian stayed calm and kept it simple. He communicated that he had purchased the items and was trying to leave. He did not run. He did not hide the bag. He did not act like someone avoiding attention. And even with witnesses nearby saying they saw the purchase, Evan's attention stayed locked on one point. Julian had refused. That's where this shifted from an uncomfortable store confrontation into something that could get people fired, sued, and investigated. Because once a police officer treats a person's refusal as guilt, the officer starts building reasons after the fact. And the phones kept recording. Evan Rourke didn't start by checking the register. He didn't ask a manager to pull the transaction. He didn't separate the facts from Derek's accusation. He started with control. He positioned himself close enough that Julian had to either step back or stand still. Evan kept treating the situation like a refusal problem, not an evidence problem. He pushed the idea that Julian needed to comply first, and that everything else could be sorted out later. That's a common move when an officer thinks compliance is the same thing as legality. Julian stayed calm. He didn't raise his hands dramatically. He didn't give the crowd a performance. He kept his posture steady and tried to hold the boundary. He had paid, he was leaving, and he wasn't required to hand over paperwork because someone demanded it. Meanwhile, Derek played his part like he had already committed to the story. He didn't walk over to the register to verify anything. He didn't tell Evan he might be mistaken. He stood there like he needed the police to force the outcome he couldn't legally force himself. Bystanders kept filming. A couple people spoke up and said they saw Julian pay. Evan didn't take that as a reason to slow down. He took it as noise. He repeated demands. He kept stepping into Julian's space. And when Julian didn't give him what he wanted, Evan moved from verbal pressure to physical control. He grabbed Julian. Not because Julian attacked anyone, not because Julian tried to run. Evan grabbed him because Evan wanted the situation to end with compliance, and Julian wasn't giving it. Evan pushed Julian back against the entrance glass and put him in handcuffs. While he did it, he kept talking loudly, adding labels to the moment in real time. He used words like obstruction and resisting to build a justification over the sound of the cuffs, even though Julian wasn't fighting and wasn't fleeing. That part mattered for a reason people don't always catch. When officers speak those labels out loud during an arrest, they're often creating the language that ends up in the report. They're trying to make the audience hear the conclusion before anyone checks the facts. Phones captured it from different angles. You could see Julian's controlled body language. You could see Evan's escalation. And you could see Derek standing near the doorway, like the arrest confirmed he'd been right all along. After the cuffs went on, Evan treated the shopping bag like evidence. He took it, secured it, and acted like he had just interrupted a theft in progress, even though the purchase still hadn't been verified. Then Evan transported Julian to the precinct. That ride wasn't dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was procedural. A person got handcuffed and processed based on a claim that wasn't checked because the officer treated refusal as the crime. At the station, Evan walked Julian into booking and started presenting the incident like a simple case. Suspect refused commands, suspect obstructed, suspect resisted, suspected theft. That story would have held up if nobody asked basic questions. But the booking supervisor that night, Marisol Alvarez, did ask. She didn't start with attitude. She started with the legal basis. She wanted the exact reason for the detention, the exact facts of the theft allegation, and the exact steps Evan took to confirm anything before putting someone in cuffs. Evan gave his version, and Marisol kept narrowing it down. What did Derek actually see? Was there concealment? Was there an alarm? Was there a register check? Did anyone confirm the purchase? And the more she asked, the more it became clear the foundation was thin. Then she checked Julian's identification. That's when the temperature changed instantly. Julian wasn't just another guy in a holding area. He was FBI. Marisol didn't treat that as a reason to protect Evan. She treated it as a reason to protect the integrity of the department before it got crushed by evidence. She ordered the handcuffs removed immediately. And she initiated preservation steps on the spot. Bodycam footage, dispatch audio, and any store video that could be obtained, because she understood something Evan didn't. Once the footage exists, you don't get to rewrite what happened. Marisol Alvarez didn't treat the FBI ID like a get-out-of-jail card. She treated it like a risk signal. If the stop was weak, and if force was used to cover the weakness, the department was about to get exposed. She separated Julian from Evan's control immediately. She had the cuffs removed, logged the time, and made sure the property was handled correctly. Then she went back to Evan and did what should have happened at the store entrance. She demanded a clean timeline and actual theft facts. Evan kept leaning on refusal and non-compliance, as if that was the offense. Marisol didn't accept that as a legal basis. She asked who verified the purchase. She asked whether a manager confirmed a missing payment. She asked whether any alarm triggered. She asked whether anyone watched Julian conceal items or bypass a register. Evan didn't have those answers. At that point, Marisol moved into preservation mode. She flagged the incident for Bodycam retention, requested dispatch audio, and pushed for store video to be secured before it could go missing. She also documented Derek's role and the specific detail that mattered most. The store employee had blocked the exit before any theft confirmation existed. Then the watch commander, Connor Bennett, got pulled in. Bennett's first instinct was containment. He wanted it framed as a simple misunderstanding at a retail store. The kind of thing that gets smoothed over with a quiet release and a short note in the system. He tried to steer the conversation toward resolution without consequence. He focused on how quickly things could be cleared up if everyone stayed calm and didn't escalate it beyond the building. Julian didn't take the bait. He stayed composed, but he made his position clear through actions, not speeches. He requested the incident number. He requested the names and badge numbers involved. He asked for confirmation that all video sources were preserved. He asked what legal basis Evan had used to detain and handcuff him, and how that basis would be reflected in the report. He also made calls, not angry calls, structured calls, the kind of calls that trigger oversight automatically because they create a second record outside local control. He contacted his chain, and he made sure the department understood this wasn't a private inconvenience. It was a public accountability issue. Bennett tried to keep Julian inside the "we'll handle it internally" lane. Julian refused that framing. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't brag about his job. He didn't ask for special treatment. He pushed for the same thing any person should get, but often doesn't. The truth recorded accurately, the evidence preserved, and the process reviewed by people who weren't involved. That decision forced the department to shift gears. Because once evidence holds, the story can't be adjusted to fit the report. Before the night shift even ended, word started spreading in small ways. A bystander posted a clip showing the handcuffing. Another post showed Derek blocking the exit. Another showed Evan pushing the situation from "check the receipt" to "arrest." The angles didn't match each other perfectly, which made them more believable, not less. By morning, it was viral. Multiple clips, multiple witnesses, multiple timestamps. People could see Julian's body language. They could see that he wasn't fighting or running. They could hear Evan adding labels while applying cuffs. They could see the shopping bag being treated like evidence, even though no one had verified a theft. That's when the department lost the option to control the narrative. Any statement that leaned too hard on suspected theft or resisted would be compared directly to video. And video doesn't care about pride, rank, or traditions. Internal affairs got involved fast, not because the department suddenly became brave, but because the case had an obvious failure point. There were clear questions about probable cause and unnecessary force, and the public already had the receipts in the form of footage. Evan was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That wasn't a conclusion, it was a pressure release valve. The department needed time because the video created exposure on multiple fronts: wrongful detention, excessive force, and report accuracy. And the spotlight didn't stop at the badge. People started asking why a store employee thought he could block an exit. They asked what Apex Digital trained loss prevention to do. They asked whether this was routine and just rarely filmed. They asked why police were being called as an enforcement tool before anyone verified a purchase. Apex Digital Corporate went into damage control. They signaled that they would review policies, but the video had already shown the main issue. This wasn't a receipt check. It was a physical detention by a private employee, followed by a police response that treated refusal as a crime. City risk management started moving behind the scenes. When there is clear footage and multiple witnesses, the question stops being whether the city will pay. The question becomes how much and what policy changes they must agree to so the same thing doesn't happen again next week. The early discussions focused on concrete standards, not vague promises. Refusing to show a receipt was clarified as not being probable cause by itself. Officers were pushed to verify alleged theft through available means before escalating, especially when the person is calm and still on scene. Detentions and handcuffing required specific articulable facts tied to an actual offense, not generalized non-compliance. Supervisors were required to match reports to camera evidence, not the other way around. Store-facing guidance tightened. Loss prevention blocking exits would be treated as a major red flag, requiring supervisor involvement and careful legal review. And Julian kept doing the same thing he did at the doorway. He stayed calm, stayed factual, and refused to let the system downgrade what happened into a minor misunderstanding. Because it wasn't minor, it was a chain of decisions. Internal affairs ended up with a simple problem and an ugly answer. The theft claim could not be supported once the register record and store video were reviewed, and the detention had been built around forcing compliance instead of confirming facts. Evan Rourke's body cam and the bystander recordings showed the same pattern from different angles. He treated refusal like guilt, closed distance, used physical control, and then tried to justify it by layering labels like obstruction and resisting even though Julian Cross stayed on scene and did not fight or run. With the footage locked in, the department couldn't rely on a report-driven narrative because the cameras showed what happened in order. The store did not escape the fallout. Apex Digital's loss prevention practices became part of the story because Derek Harlan didn't just ask for a receipt. He blocked the exit before verifying anything, and then called police describing theft without first confirming a missing payment. Corporate had to answer why employees were being trained to use their bodies to stop customers, and why police were treated like an enforcement shortcut instead of a last step after basic verification. Derek became a liability fast, and the store faced pressure to change policies that blurred the line between a request and a detention. Once the incident went viral from multiple angles, the city's response shifted from defending the officer to limiting damage. Settlement talks started because the risk was obvious. Witnesses, clear video, no verified theft, and a detention that escalated into handcuffs anyway. The policy changes that followed were the kind departments write when cameras make denial impossible. Refusing a receipt check was clarified as not creating probable cause by itself. Officers were pushed to verify theft claims through available means before escalating, and handcuffing standards were tightened so non-compliance alone could not be used as a shortcut to control. Supervisors were also put on notice that reports had to match video evidence, not the other way around. Julian treated the outcome as accountability, not personal revenge. He focused on documentation, chain of custody, and oversight, because those are the only tools that work when someone tries to turn a boundary into a crime. He also made sure the lesson didn't stay inside the building. The public saw how quickly a routine moment can become an arrest when authority gets offended, and they saw how evidence preservation and outside scrutiny force the system to correct itself. Now it's on you. If you were a bystander in that entrance, would you have filmed, spoken up, or stayed out of it? And if you were the customer, would you have complied just to avoid escalation or held the line like Julian did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who thinks receipt refusal equals guilt. And subscribe if you want more stories where the truth wins, because the cameras and the paper trail don't lie.
Sir, I need your license and I need proof of citizenship.
What's the legal basis for asking citizenship at this checkpoint?
Answer the question. Are you a U.S. citizen, yes or no?
Yes, I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm also federal law enforcement. I can be verified immediately through official channels.
Man, don't try to fool me. Show me proof.
I can present credentials or call a supervisor and verify.
What happens when ICE agents set up a surprise checkpoint at a shopping plaza exit and demand citizenship proof from a black U.S. Marshal, then refuse to verify him even after he showed federal credentials? The answer is right here in this situation. Before we get into it, comment where you're watching from. And if you like stories where people keep their composure, know their rights, and still hold the system accountable, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the ending. This happened in San Antonio, Texas, at a well-lit shopping plaza exit, where cars funneled from the parking lanes into one tight choke point before the main road. A temporary safety checkpoint had been set up without warning. Cones narrowed the exit. Two unmarked SUVs sat angled like they owned the lane. Agents in tactical vests worked the line fast, waving most cars through after a quick look, stopping others for longer conversations that didn't match the safety label. William Martinez drove into that lane like everyone else. He had just left a city police department and was now a U.S. Marshal. He wasn't dressed like he was heading to court or serving a warrant. He looked like a guy leaving errands, because that's what he was doing. The only difference was what sat in his wallet and what he knew about procedure. At first, it looked routine. An agent stepped up as William rolled to a stop. The agent didn't treat it like traffic flow management. He treated it like a status check. He demanded more than a driver's license, and the tone wasn't curiosity. It was suspicion, like William had already failed a test he didn't know he was taking. William stayed controlled. He provided identification. He made it simple. He informed the agent that he was a federal officer and that verification could be done immediately through official channels. He didn't argue about politics or the checkpoint itself. He focused on the one thing that should have ended the stop: confirmation. That's where the agent made his first decision. Instead of taking the obvious step, calling a supervisor, contacting a listed office number, or running William through standard systems, the agent treated William's attempt to verify as a challenge. He demanded additional documentation that didn't match the situation. He shifted the stop from checkpoint screening into a personal interrogation. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He didn't reach suddenly or act dramatic. He kept his hands visible and repeated the same offer: verify through proper channels. He also requested a supervisor, because that's what you do when the contact goes off the rails. The agent didn't like that. He signaled for another agent, turning it into a 2-on-1 stance immediately. That second agent arrived with the body language of someone told there was a problem, not someone told there was a misunderstanding. The first agent summarized William as not cooperating in a way that made William's calm look like defiance. This is a common tactic in power encounters. Redefine calm boundaries as non-compliance, then use non-compliance to justify force. William kept it procedural. He identified his agency again. He indicated how to verify. He did not consent to unnecessary rummaging, but he didn't physically resist anything. He asked for names and badge numbers in a steady tone. He also pointed out that they were in public and that there were cameras. The agents acted like the cameras didn't matter. They ordered William out of the vehicle, not because he had committed a visible crime, not because he was a threat, because they wanted control of the space and the narrative. They wanted him standing beside the car, away from the steering wheel, away from the normal rhythm of a stop, where they could reposition him, search him, and manage what bystanders saw. William complied with the exit order because he understood how quickly refusal can be written into a report. He stepped out slowly and he kept his hands visible. He stayed focused on process. He repeated the supervisor request. The first agent moved directly into a search posture. A pat-down happened in full view of the exit lane, with cars creeping past and drivers staring. The second agent hovered close, watching William's hands, watching his face, watching for a reaction they could label as aggressive. Then the wallet came out. The agents went through William's wallet like they were looking for a mistake. They handled his credentials like props. They inspected his identification, turned it over, looked at it again, and still acted like nothing was enough. William remained steady, but he did something important. He kept reminding them there was an easy confirmation path they were choosing not to take. That's the core of what made this incident different. It wasn't confusion. It was refusal to verify. The first agent continued pressing for extra documentation, the kind of demand that suggests the goal isn't identification. The goal is submission. William didn't give them what they were trying to extract. Fear. He stayed formal. He kept insisting that verification be done through the proper system. That's when the agents tried the next move: isolate and label. They angled William closer to their SUVs, away from his own car, and away from the small cluster of pedestrians near the storefront sidewalk. The second agent used positioning to block sightlines from the nearest bystanders. The first agent talked over William, cutting off explanations, keeping the tempo fast so it felt like William was stalling, even though he was offering solutions. But the bystanders still saw enough. Phones came out. A woman near the curb raised hers and held it steady. Another person farther back zoomed in. The plaza lights above the exit lane made sure the video was clear. And on top of that, the plaza itself had its own cameras pointed at that exit because shopping centers don't like liability. William asked again for a supervisor. The agents didn't produce one. They didn't call in someone to de-escalate. They didn't run the simplest check that would have ended the stop. Instead, they escalated to restraints. They told William he was being detained. Then they put him in handcuffs in the open lane while cars continued to move through the checkpoint behind them. That detail mattered because it showed how comfortable they were turning a public shopping plaza into a detention stage. William didn't fight the cuffs. He didn't make the scene physical. He stayed controlled and kept documenting with his words: agency, verification options, supervisor request, and the fact that they were ignoring all of it. Then they moved him to the back seat of an SUV. The door shut. The checkpoint kept operating like nothing had happened. People kept driving through while a black federal officer sat cuffed inside a government vehicle because two agents decided they didn't need to confirm what he was telling them. And in that moment, William understood the real danger wasn't the checkpoint. It was the mindset running it. Detain first, verify later. Once William was in the back of the SUV, the whole situation shifted from public intimidation to paperwork protection. The agents didn't stop the checkpoint. They didn't pause operations to confirm what was already sitting in William's wallet. They kept the lane moving, kept the cones up, kept the optics calm for everyone else, and treated William like an item they could relocate out of sight. That's how these encounters get sanitized. Move the person. Control the setting. Then write the story later. Inside the SUV, William stayed steady. He didn't beg, he didn't bargain. He did what experienced officers do when they realize the other side is committed to the wrong path. He started mentally building a timeline. Time of stop, location, number of agents, what was requested, what was offered, what verification steps were refused, where the bystanders were standing with phones out. He also made one point clear the entire time through calm reporting, not argument. They could verify him immediately through official channels, and they were choosing not to. The drive downtown wasn't long, but it was long enough for a narrative to form. In the front seats, the agents talked like they had already decided what William was. Not a federal officer who needed a call to confirm, a problem they needed to justify. That mindset is what makes detain-first decisions feel normal to the people doing them. When they reached the federal processing area, the contrast was immediate. The intake staff weren't interested in ego. They were interested in identification and procedure. William was brought in still cuffed, still treated like a detainee, and still in public view of people moving through the building. That detail mattered too. The humiliation didn't end at the plaza. It followed him into a government space, attached to his name, attached to his face. attached to how strangers looked at him for those minutes. At the counter, William presented the same credentials the agents had already handled at the checkpoint. He reported his identity and agency again. He asked that a supervisor be notified and that verification be completed through the normal federal channels. This time, it happened the way it always should have. Within minutes, staff initiated the basic checks the plaza agents refused to do. They used internal directories. They contacted the appropriate duty line. They validated the credential information in a way that didn't depend on anyone's personal belief. And the moment the confirmation came back, the whole posture of the room changed. Because now it wasn't a debate. It was a fact. The intake specialist's reaction wasn't dramatic, but it was telling. She didn't treat it like a close call. She treated it like an unnecessary failure upstream, the kind that creates liability, and William was uncuffed. He was moved out of the detainee flow. The processing staff got him seated, got the situation logged properly, and started asking the right question. Why was he brought in like this if he could be confirmed that quickly? That question traveled fast. Supervisory staff in the building became involved because detaining a U.S. Marshal at a shopping plaza checkpoint isn't a normal error you shrug off. Someone had to own the decision chain. Someone had to document why the most basic verification steps weren't taken at the point of contact. And someone had to explain why a stop that began as a so-called safety checkpoint turned into a status interrogation without clear cause. William didn't need to raise his voice to make the seriousness land. He simply stuck to sequence and procedure. He reported that he identified himself, displayed credentials, offered verification channels, requested a supervisor, and was still searched, cuffed, and transported. Then he did the part people forget matters. He refused to let it end as a casual apology. He requested the incident documentation tied to the transport. He requested the names of the agents involved. He requested the timestamps. He requested to know what basis they were claiming for the detention. He made sure the building had a record that this wasn't a person caught without ID. This was a person with credentials that were examined and dismissed. While that was happening downtown, the plaza scene had already started spreading. Bystanders didn't need to understand federal agency details to recognize what looked wrong. A calm black man being pulled out of a traffic funnel, searched, cuffed, and placed in an SUV while cars kept moving through cones like a routine operation. The visuals did the work. The audio didn't have to be perfect. The sequence was enough. One of the videos captured something simple but devastating. The agents had time to search William and sort through his wallet, but they didn't take the time to verify. That's what the public saw. That's what it looked like. And later, when the paperwork came out, that gap became the center of everything. Because the paperwork had to explain why confirmation didn't happen until downtown. And here's where it got worse for the agents. The first draft of the narrative started forming immediately after William was removed from the plaza. Agents involved began documenting their justification in the typical way agencies do when they know a detention will be questioned. Language that makes refusal look like resistance. Language that makes escalation look like necessity. Language that minimizes the alternatives that were available. But William already knew what would decide this: recordings and timestamps. Checkpoints like that typically involve multiple recording sources. Agents often have body-worn or vehicle-based video. The SUVs had their own systems. The plaza had exterior cameras. And the public had phones. William's job wasn't to argue with a report. It was to force a comparison between the report and the footage. As soon as he was cleared and released, he contacted his side of the system. A deputy marshal colleague, Serena Holt, picked up and treated it exactly as serious as it was. She advised William to do 3 things immediately: lock down his timeline while it was fresh, preserve any contact information for witnesses, and request every piece of video tied to the plaza and the transport before anything could conveniently disappear. William followed that guidance. He documented everything he could remember without embellishing it. He noted what he offered and what was refused. He wrote down the sequence of escalation. He recorded where bystanders stood and which direction their phones were pointed. He noted that the checkpoint remained active during his detention, making the event visible to dozens of strangers. Then he waited for the paperwork. And when the initial documentation finally surfaced through official channels, it didn't match the speed of the downtown confirmation. The record reflected delay and uncertainty, where there should have been an immediate verification step. It leaned on vague phrasing where there should have been specific checks. It framed the detention like an unavoidable outcome instead of a chosen one. That mismatch was the opening. Because William didn't need to prove he was a marshal, that was already confirmed. What he needed to prove next was that the agents ignored a clear verification path and escalated anyway. That turns a bad encounter into an accountability case. By the time William got home, the situation had already entered its second phase, the part where everyone wrote their version down and hoped the recordings wouldn't contradict it. The first written summary from the checkpoint came through the usual channels, and it followed a familiar pattern. It leaned on vague language about uncertainty. It suggested William's identity couldn't be confirmed at the scene. It framed the escalation as a response to his behavior, instead of a response to the agents refusing the simplest verification step. William didn't debate the narrative on emotion. He attacked it on sequence. He documented what he had offered at the plaza: credentials, agency identification, and immediate verification through official channels. He documented what the agents chose not to do: call a supervisor early, contact a duty line, run a basic confirmation, or slow the contact down once credentials were shown. Then the footage started coming in. A bystander video was the first thing that mattered, because it captured the open lane reality the report tried to smooth out. It showed William being directed out, searched, and restrained in a public traffic funnel, while the checkpoint continued around him. It showed that the agents had the time and space to sort through his wallet, yet still didn't use that time to verify. That bystander, Tanya, didn't make herself the story. She simply handed over the cleanest timeline. What happened, how fast it escalated, and how little it matched the idea of a routine safety checkpoint. Her clip gave William something paper can't compete with: a neutral sequence other people could watch. The next layer was harder to get but more damaging. Plaza cameras covered the exit lane. Those cameras didn't care what anyone claimed later. They showed how William was pulled out of the flow when other vehicles were waved through. They showed where the agents stood and how quickly the contact shifted from traffic control into a containment posture. They showed bystanders filming from the sidewalk. They also showed that the scene stayed orderly, which cut against any suggestion that William created a safety threat. Then came the agency records tied to the agents themselves. Dispatch logs and call records told the story the plaza agents didn't want told. There was no early verification attempt. There was no prompt supervisor involvement at the key moment when William presented credentials. If the paperwork implied that a supervisor was consulted before restraints, the timestamps didn't support it. If the paperwork implied that William refused to identify, the videos showed him staying in place, staying controlled, and continuing to offer verification routes while the agents moved towards search and cuffs anyway. This is the part where accountability becomes unavoidable, because it stops being about interpretation and becomes about decisions. William and Deputy Marshal Serena Holt pushed it through the right oversight pathways fast. Not a social media campaign, not a public rant. Formal complaints routed properly, backed by a timeline, and supported by independent video and location data. That forced a structured review. A supervisor from the ICE side was assigned to collect statements, footage, and operational plans for the checkpoint. The review immediately focused on 3 points that were hard to defend. 1. Why the stop became a status interrogation. without a clear operational trigger. 2. Why verification wasn't attempted when William presented credentials and offered official confirmation. 3. Why restraints and transport were used while the checkpoint continued as if nothing unusual was happening. When investigators compared the written narrative to the recordings, the gaps stood out. The written narrative tried to make the escalation sound like the only option. The footage showed multiple off-ramps the agents ignored, and the closer they looked, the worse it got. The checkpoint plan itself became part of the question. It wasn't just about William. It was about the structure that allowed agents to operate a surprise stop at a shopping plaza exit with minimal transparency, and then treat a calm person with federal credentials like a problem to be controlled instead of a claim to be verified. The consequences didn't come in one dramatic moment. They came in steps, the way real systems move. First, the agents involved were pulled off checkpoint work while the review is active. Then supervisors started asking why the obvious verification steps weren't done at the plaza. Then the case shifted from a simple complaint to a formal performance and conduct issue, because the evidence showed willful refusal to confirm and an escalation chain that created public harm. Agent Pierce, who drove the escalation, didn't get to hide behind confusion. The review focused on his choices, refusing verification, treating credentials as insufficient without testing them, and using restraints when less intrusive options were right there. Agent Soto didn't escape scrutiny either. Following along still meant participating in an unjustified escalation. The review treated her as a secondary decision-maker who could have insisted on verification and didn't. Supervisory accountability landed too, because someone approved the checkpoint posture, and someone allowed a system where verification could be skipped in favor of control. What happened to William mattered just as much. He didn't leave it as a personal insult. He treated it as professional damage. He documented the impact, a public detention in front of strangers, the effect on his reputation, and the operational risk created when federal agencies detain each other without verification. That kind of incident doesn't just embarrass a person. It undermines trust between agencies and makes every future encounter more dangerous. Because of that, the resolution included more than discipline. A policy change was issued for similar operations. When a person presented law enforcement credentials and offered official verification, agents had to attempt confirmation through approved channels before escalating to restraints unless there was an immediate safety threat. The policy also required supervisor notification at specific escalation points during administrative operations like checkpoints, and it tightened the documentation required when a stop shifted from brief screening into detention. Training followed, not as a feel-good gesture, but as a direct response to what the footage showed. The emphasis wasn't on optics, it was on procedure, confirmation steps, de-escalation, and making sure power didn't replace process. William didn't celebrate. He didn't posture. He just got something most people never get in situations like this: a clean record showing he was right to stay controlled and insist on verification. The system didn't give him justice out of kindness. It gave it because the timeline was locked in by cameras, logs, and disciplined reporting. And that's the real takeaway. If you ever find yourself in a power encounter where someone wants you to prove your humanity on their terms, the biggest advantage you can have is composure plus documentation. Not because it makes the moment easy, but because it makes the aftermath undeniable. Now be real with me in the comments. If you were William, would you have stayed as calm as he did, or would you have lost it when they ignored verification and went straight to cuffs? If you want more stories like this, where preparation beats intimidation and accountability actually lands, like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.